Hey, I know this guy. This is going to be pretty heady, and it's a lot more about thinking than about technology. So I want to ask everyone here to just give this a minute and let it sink in. I'm not attacking you when I'm putting these ideas forward, and some of these ideas might feel that way. So we're going to try and define developer experience, which is a tricky thing. We're going to talk about why this is important, what it is not, and how to improve it. So the first thing is, why is this important? Why do you care? And we often hear happy people are more productive. And I'm going to call bullshit on that because I know a lot of stoners that are not productive and they're super happy. They love their job. And they show up, but they don't do a good job. Another reason why DX is important is because you're a developer. Or show of hands, who's a developer? All right, so this is a very self-interested thing. We want DX to get better because this is our lived experience. I think there's actually a main reason here that kind of gets cut out, unfortunately, by the slide deck thing, but great experiences empower exceptional outcomes, and that's what we're really after. We do want to do a great job at what we do. Okay, so what is developer experience? It's kind of downstream this idea of user experience. And I went to the Nielsen-Norman group, and by the way, all these slides are available online, and all the links are at the very end, so you don't have to remember anything, you can just go there later. Nielsen's known for their expertise in user experience, and I'd say they're probably the leading firm in the world. And so their definition is that it encompasses all aspects of an end user's interaction with a company, its services and products. That doesn't sit quite right with me. It's kind of corporate. And it's about end users, it's not about developers. So maybe developer experience is about all aspects of developers' interactions with a company, its services and products. This too doesn't feel quite right to me. It feels a little corporate and off and not quite about what my day's about. So I went to ChatGPT and I asked it what it thought, and I thought this was actually a pretty good answer. And then I hit regenerate, and it gave me a completely different answer that was also pretty good. And then I hit regenerate, and it gave me yet another answer that was also quite convincing. And so what I learned there was it doesn't know anything. So GitHub, and by extension Microsoft, have been studying this with their research group, and they're doing some really good work here. I have a ton of links from them that I strongly recommend everybody check out. They are probably leading the way on the science about this. So not opinions, not the ideas, but the actual science. They think DX examines the juxtaposition of developers, processes, and tools and how it positively or negatively impacts software development. I like that a lot. That's a very clean way to describe what we're trying to do here. Another way to say it is it depends, which we all say as developers all the time. What is developer? I don't know, it depends. Which is kind of what ChatGPT was saying. So what is not developer experience? It's not a particular tool or technology. So developer experience isn't a thing that you can install with NPM. Developer experience is not a specific framework, and it's not a specific methodology, although some of those exist and some of those are really good, and I'm going to talk about them. Developer experience is also not a particular work environment or context. I read, working remote is either good or bad for your developer experience, and I think that really depends on your personal working from home situation. If you're working from home in an apartment with 4 roommates that have kids, maybe not a great place to work from home. If you're working from home and you live in this pristine place that's surrounded by gardens and it's nice and it's got great Wi-Fi, maybe it is a good place to work from home. So developer experience isn't a particular context. It's really what you bring to it. So what are the hallmarks of great developer experience? How do we know it when we see it? It just works is a common one that gets thrown around a lot. So when you actually run the software and you're like, whoa, surprisingly this actually works. It's so rare that it is a delight when that happens. Sometimes we call this frictionless or fast. And fast is interesting because fast is something should be. It's not something that you can necessarily strive to be. And so by that I mean you'll hear people talk about how their build step's really fast. I don't have a build step, which is faster than that, right? It feels safe. It feels like something I'm going to use that it's not going to screw me in the future. It's not going to get exploited. It's not going to ruin my day. I'm not going to get in trouble for using it. Stable and reliable. Great developer experiences don't break you on a minor. When you run npm update, you continue to work. And I think the one that we don't talk about enough is that I'm having fun. Like, I actually enjoy what I'm doing during the day. I like my job. I'm not mad or angry or frustrated or confused. I'm enjoying it. So with that sort of context, could we come up with like a stronger definition about what is developer experience? And I think we can. Again, going back to Microsoft and their Developer Velocity Lab, which is sort of a weird name, they feel it encompasses how we feel, how we think, and how we value our work, which is really interesting because this is starting to depart from the day-to-day corporate productivity stuff. This is more about our feelings and like where we're at. Now, the people at, DVL, Developer Velocity Lab, we're actually behind a thing called the DORA report. Has anyone heard of this before? Okay, well, you got to check it out if you haven't. It is incredible. They do a 6-year study of different development teams on different metrics and basically grade them to see how well they operate. And they come to some pretty strong conclusions about practices that we should employ. It comes down to development frequency, lead time for changes, change failure rate, and time to restore a service. This sounds pretty boring and kind of corporate, but it's a lot better than measuring lines of code, which Bill Gates would famously say that's like measuring an airplane by weight. So DORA is actually sort of a little bit of an older framework, and it's very much about activities that we do. And they've come up with a new one called SPACE. And SPACE is a lot less about these things you can measure, these activities that we have, and they're a lot more about like the vibes, frankly, how you feel about your work. SPACE kind of looks at these 3 different aspects of flow state. Has anyone heard of this term, flow state? Okay, everyone here is down with that, so I don't have to explain it. Flow is basically when you're feeling yourself, when you're working and you're just like, you know what you're doing is good and you're doing a good job. Feedback loops is the other one. This one I'm really big on too. We need tight feedback loops because we're scientists, we're iterating, we're testing things, we're failing, and then we're fixing, and that's how we work. And if our feedback loop is in minutes, then our time to deliver value is going to be in hours. Whereas if our feedback loops are in seconds, all of a sudden we're a lot faster. And then the last one's cognitive load, so just managing complexity, how hard that is. We could dig into this chart a little bit and talk about each of these individual things, but that would get super fucking boring, so you can look at this later. What it kind of comes back down to is productivity. And so it kept coming up. Everything I read was all about productivity, and I'm like, ugh, I feel like an assembly worker in Ford. Like, I don't know if I like that. But so I looked up the definition. It's the effectiveness of productive effort. And that I think I like. So effectiveness, like how effective are we at our jobs? Not necessarily have we boosted productivity by 30% for Henry Ford. So this is where we're going to start digging into like what is not DX. And we said earlier, it's not, a particular tool or methodology or work context, but what is not DX needs a bonus round because a lot of things that get called DX are logical fallacies. Everybody here know what logical fallacies are? Let's just dig in on that. So logical fallacies are arguments that sound convincing, but are based on faulty logic and are therefore invalid. And this isn't news. This goes back to the Greeks, so we're talking 4,000 years ago. These are very common arguments that we see around DX, and this is the part where things might get a little spicy, so just sit with it. So DX is not how popular something is. So an appeal to popularity, argumentum ad populum, is claiming a truth or affirming something's good because a large majority think so. I call this the Nickelback problem. Sorry if you're a fan. That's not music. Maybe it's the McDonald's problem. Like, they've served 1 billion, they're not the best hamburger. Let's just, be honest. This is also why surveys are kind of dangerous for decision making and should be supplemented with some form of empirical data that you can prove. So surveys are okay, but maybe not the only measure of something. Appeal to authority, very close to popularity, is one that we see a lot. This is when an appeal is made to parties having no legitimate claim to the authority at matter at hand. I think Carl Sagan said this better. Basically, science says mistrust arguments from authority. We should be arguing from data, not from your resume. And it's okay for someone to make a claim based on authority, but they should use it with evidence, is what we're trying to say. Straw man, this comes up a lot. I think Twitter was basically designed to share this idea. It's refuting an argument based an argument different from the one that was under discussion, without acknowledging the distinction. And so, like, one who engages in fallacy is said to be attacking a straw man. I've heard a common one where it's like, well, the tests are slow, we shouldn't be running the tests. It's like, the tests are slow, you gotta fix the tests. Make them fast. Appeal to novelty. This is when we prematurely claim an idea or proposal is superior because it's new and shiny. Developers, we're bad for this. You know who's worse, though? Investors. They fall for this one all the time. All the time. New's cool, though. I like new things. I'm not saying I don't. And that actually dovetails nicely with the final one here, reduction to the absurd. This comes up all the time. It's trying to establish a claim by showing the opposite scenario would lead to absurdity. There's some good writing from Socrates about this. Should not rate tests as an absurdity. So these are invalid arguments. These are not valid arguments. They do not belong in the discussion. We are engineers and scientists, so we can just dismiss these outright. These are not developer experience. Which dovetails nicely with my dig at Ruby. So, so Ruby's optimized for programmer happiness, and this one comes up in sort of DX circles all the time. And I'm just going to call bullshit on that one because what programmer, right? Like, you might like Ruby. I love Ruby. I wrote Rails apps for a long time, but this is subjective. What makes one person happy doesn't always make another person happy. And so this is pure marketing FUD. If you want to see like the most entertaining composition of logical fallacies ever written, seriously, with the context of what I just showed you, those slides, read this. It's hilariously bad. There is no merit to it whatsoever. Okay, so anyways, can we come up with a stronger definition of DX that is like empirical and strong and based in facts? And I keep coming back to like the productivity thing. While it feels Henry Fordish and a little corporate, I think we can be cool with this. So I was looking at like different examples of organizations that are out there, and this one's really cool. These guys plant trees. So what do you think the point of this organization is? What is their purpose? Why do they exist? It's to plant trees. It's not to make developers happy, but they have software. It's kind of a juxtaposition. I love how they've got like electric photoshopped on this truck on their homepage. Sure it is. Caterpillar, why do they exist? What are they here for? What are they doing for us in the world? Their goal is to tear up trees, that's right. Sell heavy equipment. That's why they exist. That's what they're doing. I know we all love this website, especially during tax season. So why does this exist? It's to provide the public information about the Canadian government. And so I'm proposing DX is about the practices and tools that empower developers to create great end-user experiences for our customers, or our users, if we don't have customers. And so in the case of tree planting, it's not about making me happy as a developer. It's about planting more trees. Or if I'm in BC, digging them up. So a quick recap. Developer experience is not the same as user experience. Developer experience is about a developer's lived experience, where user experience is about the lived experience of end users. So that's a mouthful. But the ultimate goal of developer experience is to create great user experiences. That's what we're here for. That's why we're doing our jobs. okay, cool story, Brian, but how? And this is more wordy stuff and hopefully kind of fun, and there will be some spice here too. But we're going to talk a little bit about strategy and tactics. Strategy is, where you want to play. Tactics are how you plan to win. So the strategy really is about your audience and who you're trying to reach. And DX strategy ostensibly is about developers, but there's a lot of different kinds of developers. It's not just developers. There's back-end developers, there's front-end developers, systems engineers. And then who are their customers is really important, because those customers are going to have completely different contexts that will inform the tools and decisions you make. And I'll get more into that. So when you know who your audience is, then you can have the tactics to employ, and I think there's just sort of two very broad sets of tactics that we can look at that might be useful. Modern software engineering, which I know sounds buzzwordy, but I will get very specific about what I mean when I say that, and intentional dependency selection, which is super spicy. So Dave Farley wrote a book called Modern Software Engineering, which makes life easier for me. This book is in my top 5 for programming books. It's amazing. I think everyone here should just go and read it. If you take anything from this talk, buy that book. It's that good. Software engineering is the application of an empirical scientific approach to finding efficient economic solutions to practical problems in software. Now, that's refreshing. That's like very clear and obvious what we are about and what we're trying to do here. And who for? So I really love that. That's not about, engineering sometimes gets side-eyed in software because we're sort of just throwing NPM at the wall and hoping something sticks. But that's not engineering, right? Engineering is looking at limits and measuring things and testing things and failing and then, revisiting our materials and applying scientific method to what we do. So Dave's book is really about learning and managing complexity. Learning is the science part. Managing complexity is staying afloat. So this is a scientific, dare say agile, and I know that's a loaded term, so please don't roll your eyes, but approach to software. I think agile had some good ideas, but then it kind of became a consultancy thing. So iteration, feedback, incrementalism, working small experiments, empiricism, so looking at the data. And then managing complexity is really all about just retaining our ability to iterate. As systems grow in complexity, they get harder and harder to work on, and they can become big balls of mud, so we need ways to deal with that. Modularity, cohesion, separation of concerns, and I'm not going to get into these because I'm certain that you've heard enough about them, but they get thrown around a lot. And I think it's worth examining whether or not your tools and practices are enabling these facets. So in his book, too, he talks about what we want to measure. And this is also really interesting because, we saw with Dora and with Space Framework, we had different ideas of what we could measure. Dave kind of distilled that down to stability and throughput. You need a stable foundation to build your business on. You can't be chasing breaking changes all the time. You have to be adding new value, or else you're just spinning your tires. And that's what throughput's all about. So in his mind, these are the two measures. They provide justification for tools and techniques. Doesn't recommend any particular tools. Doesn't recommend any particular runtimes or techniques. That's your problem. And you're going to use science to figure that out. And these are extremely related concepts, so chasing unplanned work due to breaking changes isn't going to make your throughput better. And chasing breaking changes indicates very poor dependency selection, and that's the sort of second half of the recommended practices. So intentional dependency selection. Our problems are always our fault. And so this is such a great quote. The greatest intellectual discovery of our generation is that the real cause of problems is our solutions. I think Taylor Swift said it best. Hi, it's me, I'm the problem, it's me. She's right. So code is a liability. We've known this for a really long time. What the code does for you is an asset. Our code is garbage, and you are the asset that writes it. And this is such an important thing, because we get precious about our code and our dependencies, and we kind of add them and accrue them and build up almost an attachment to them. And then the next question is, are dependencies just code? And no, they are not. We all have governance dependencies. And so some examples. Your bank is a dependency. Anybody remember Silicon Valley Bank a few weeks ago? That was a pretty important dependency, it turns out. Your payment provider is a dependency. Your RCS is a dependency. And your developer experience is completely different, depending on these different tools. Your web host is a dependency. That's a big one. Your business model is a major dependency. And this is a bit racy for sure, but think about the difference in motivations, in compliance, in governance, in storage. This is your developer experience in a completely different light. So one size definitely doesn't fit all. Governance dependencies are contextual to the organization that you're in, and great developer experiences are going to be downstream making very good choices. And you're going to have both code and governance dependencies, and you have to be intentional about these. You can't just npm install your way to success. So what are desirable dependencies? Stable with clear and predictable versioning would be a desirable dependency. We don't want dependencies that are going to ship breaking changes on minor and patch. Clear provenance. Who owns this code? That can come back to bite you. If it's an open source code, having a good license is extremely important, and clear governance for that code. There's a lot of open source, but you can't commit to it upstream. It's just open code. And that's not good governance, and that could be a problem. Maybe you don't care, depending on your context. Good docs are important. Humane channels for support, closely related. Code of conduct, I think, is almost always necessary at this point in our industry, and a good thing. Active code's a fun one. So if you talk to investor types, they'll be like, that project has tons of issues. And it's like, is that good? Is that actually an indication of a healthy project? I know number of stars is a completely meaningless one, so that's worth mentioning. How we manage our dependencies is almost as important as our selection of dependencies. We have to do this, so you should use a package manager. This is not spicy anymore. You should only use one package manager. That might be spicy. You should probably only use the package manager supported by your runtime, e.g. npm if it's Node. Okay, that's spicy, I know. Vendoring, it's okay. You can do that. You know that folder called node modules? That's vendoring. You're allowed. It's fine. You should use a security scanner, but audit that code all the time with the goal to remove it. You don't want code. It's a liability. Bundling is okay for front-end code, but not back-end code. Sorry. There's too many trade-offs. No build step is going to be faster. Debugging is always going to be better. The breakage is opt-in. You can still use TypeScript with JS stock. And then sort of the last one that's really important to me, and I think is still just kind of an emergent thing, is you should be practicing infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is the exact same concept as dependency management for your code as it is for your cloud resources. So you have a little file, you check it in, it says I need a web server. Everyone who gets to deploy that project has a web server. It's just like an npm dependency. If you don't do that, you end up with checklists in the README. Go to this website, click this thing in the web console, add this environment variable. That's super error prone. Humans will mess it up. You'll have bugs. You need to be able to reproduce your environments like that, and that's what Infra and Code gives you. Governance dependencies should be aligned with the business model. Walmart doesn't use AWS. News at 11. They can't. That's a major competitor. They won't use them. So that's okay. That's just a governance dependency for them. Your governance dependency should prioritize trust, which is downstream of safety and privacy, not just for you, but also for your customers. And it should avoid undifferentiated heavy lifting. Have you heard this term before, undifferentiated heavy lifting? It's a very Amazon-y term. The idea is you should outsource work you're not doing directly. So if your business doesn't sell web servers, don't manage web servers. Outsource that to Amazon. That's their problem. They're going to be better at it than you, and that's the idea of undifferentiated heavy lifting. So developer experience is more of a journey than a destination. It's pretty cheesy. It requires empiricism and humility. Sometimes people act like progress is inevitable. I think the debate is right now, we first harnessed fire either 1 million years ago or 100,000 years ago. But what we do know is we harnessed electricity about 100 years ago. Now, the human species is probably about 2 million years old. Homo sapiens, maybe 200,000 years old, 300,000 years old. So for 100 years, we turned on the light bulb. Progress is not inevitable. It's downstream making conscious choices and thinking about what we're doing. I work for begin.com. If you want to check out some of our stuff, check it out. You can deploy there web apps built with web components. And I'm going to leave you with a quote. The best solution to a problem is eliminating the conditions that created that problem rather than adding another solution which creates new, unique problems. And all this stuff is right here and online. Not bad. I did it. Thanks.